Facebook first. This Time story seems to raise more questions than it answers, but we've been down the road of scrutiny before, and eventually engagement doesn't really show any signs of cracking. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, I don't think the concerns over where's my data going and how's it being used are going to stop. I think it's only going to increase, particularly with the rise of more things that we come to realize are listening to us. You know, people increasingly understand these devices in their homes. The Alexa-type devices are listening to them. The Teslas that they're driving are keeping track of every single thing the driver is doing. So I think that trend will continue, particularly because it's pretty opaque to all of us as users to understand where that actually goes, who gets to see it, and how long it's kept. And as it sort of drips out over time that, well, this information is actually kept for years and can't be deleted. And this information was actually shared with this third party without you knowing it across companies, not just in Facebook. So I think that both that user concern and cross-platform sharing that drips out over time is going to further increase the pressure on all these companies to do something about it. And those companies that have been particularly opaque, like Facebook in the past, are probably going to face increasing pressure. So I don't expect this to end. I expect it to get a lot hotter for them.
Dick, it seems like there are two different responses to kind of big tech power. One of them from Elizabeth Warren saying break them up. A different response from Daniel Ek at Spotify saying there need to be different rules to deal with these players that have created these platforms, these essential platforms, and at the same time are playing on them in a way that at least he argues isn't fair. What do you think comes of this? Yeah. Whose way of dealing with this is going to be right?
Yeah, well, I would say that generally speaking, Daniel's perspective is more broadly shared by people here in Silicon Valley. The challenge for folks out here, all of us who watched the congressional hearings with Mark, Cheryl, Jack, Susan Wojcicki from YouTube, et cetera, there was almost a surprising lack of understanding of how these companies work from Congress and the Senate. I think most people out here were shocked at the limited understanding of the way these companies work. Daniel's perspective is more widely shared. And that perspective is that these companies are very different from each other. You can't just say break up Amazon, Google, and Facebook similarly, because the products are integrated differently. Google, for example, is the majority of the revenue, and the product work is around search. And then there are some satellite products. Amazon is completely different, and Facebook is completely different from that. So I think the short answer is Daniel's perspective is more broadly shared here and more nuanced about the kinds of things we need to ask these companies to do and where the lines inside these companies need to be drawn.
Dick, you invest in startups, right?
I do.
Do you think that these big top tech companies are just
poorly, sometimes well?
but do you think these big top tech companies that we talk about day in, day out, that they are just too big and that they are stifling innovation from these newer, smaller entrepreneurs?
Generally speaking, no. And that's a blanket statement, and it doesn't apply across the board. There are lots of things, again, like the kinds of things that Daniel Ek has been talking about that I think are appropriate to consider and think about, and how where the lines should be drawn inside these organizations and where data shouldn't be allowed to be shared, et cetera. I think that's all well and good. But competition usually comes from where the existing players aren't looking. They're trying to protect their existing moats. They're trying to protect their existing cash flow operations and their existing products. And if you look at where antitrust has focused in the past on Microsoft, for example, and bundling a browser into the desktop, Google came along and crushed them in search. And Bing didn't stand a chance because Microsoft never saw it coming and was years behind. So these startups tend to focus in the white space where the current companies don't focus. That's where the opportunity generally is. And antitrust is unlikely to help those startup companies who probably, if you ask them, would say we don't need it.
Is the Valley taking Elizabeth Warren's comments seriously?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. They're taking them very seriously. I would say that when they're taking,
it could become political reality, even though we're in the earliest stages of primary season. Yeah,
listen. When Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren agree with each other on Twitter, everyone out here takes notice, and they agreed on this point. I'm not sure that's a good thing, but when you've got the farthest person, the person on the farthest end of one spectrum, and their bipolar opposite agreeing, people out here understand that this is serious and we need to take it seriously. And I think the next step are the sorts of things you're hearing from people like Daniel Ek. Like, well, here's a more nuanced way to think about it. Here's a way maybe an insider, if you will, would think about it. And you'll probably hear a lot more of that from folks out here as we start to understand and get comfortable with this as something that's likely to happen one way or another.
Dick, do we need, we got the FCC for telcos, for ISPs. Do we need an FCC for digital platforms specifically? Because the treatment has been as though the airwaves, kind of the traditional pipes, are the real gating factor, when in fact it seems like these platforms oftentimes are just as much gatekeepers as anyone else.
The short answer is no, because the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, focuses on that specifically, and I think, to be perfectly frank, I think they do focus on it very specifically, and have been in all of these companies, back offices with their legal teams for years. With Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, I think it's been since 2008, 2009. I don't think they do a particularly good job of it, and I don't think they're particularly up to speed on how these companies work. And I think it would do us all out here a great service if they were. But that organization exists and is already spending a great deal of time and money, as are these companies, working on this.
Finally, Dick, it was last year Jack Dorsey went to the Hill and he told regulators that he would be looking into ways to downplay metrics like follower count and likes and RTs. And then we get reports yesterday that that's exactly what they plan to do. And there was some outrage on the platform about whether it would change the character. What do you think?
We'll see whether that happens. I think they're running a public test of some different ways of using the platform now, and emphasizing threaded discussion and much more, I'll call it a Reddit-style way of viewing the conversation. I'm going to not hold my breath and wait for those metrics to go away. They're an interesting engagement metric. They're frequently helpful to people in understanding what's going on in the platform and where the roar of the crowd is, if you will, the way I used to put it. So we'll see. I'm not so sure those are going to be going away anytime soon.